Right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
As she said, my name is Chioma, not Key.
Wrong, sorry.
So it's Chioma. It actually means God is good or good God. I'm Nigerian, currently shuttling between Nigeria and Hazelmere in Surrey, where my husband and 9-month-old daughter are. And I think, well, I'll let you decide if I deserve a round of applause, because getting out of the house with a 9-month-old who has suddenly realized that mommy can go away was quite the feat this morning. And I remember almost finishing getting dressed at the door because I'm putting on my socks and putting on my shoes outside because God forbid she hears the sound of feet. It means someone's leaving and therefore she must scream. So I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you to Hewit for the invitation. I'll talk about a few things, and I hope as I tell some stories. So a bit about me, start from here. That was August 2016. And instead of attending my cousin's wedding in San Antonio, I decided to fly to Maiduguri and go to Borno with the Presidential Victim Support Fund delegation. The VSF in Nigeria was set up by the president at the time to coordinate response to Boko Haram and terrorism in the country. And there was an opportunity to tell stories because, and I'd been brought in because they weren't telling the stories as they should, and there was quite a bit of negative press. And so they said, well, to be able to tell the story, you have to see what's going on. And so I flew to Maiduguri, and I remember that we had to tell my mother that I wasn't feeling well and my phone was bad. Because why is your child going to, you know, what you might call ground zero of terrorism in Nigeria? And so I'm Christian, but I had to dress that way for the entire, couple of days we were there because you want to blend in. This picture is taken from my point of view. We were headed to Bama, which is one of the locations where IDPs were housed. And it was only on the way there when I'd asked, why are we traveling with a gun carrier and all those types of things, that I learned that 2 or 3 days before, UNICEF staff had been ambushed and killed on the same road we were traveling. And I say this to say that the work that everyone in this room does is incredibly important and often is the difference between life and death for people in the field. So thank you for your service. The other thing I learned was that I am absolutely right about hating loud sounds. Absolutely, absolutely right. I don't like balloons. I funnily can shoot a gun because that's what you do if you're going to be anywhere in America. I've learned to shoot quite well. But I absolutely, absolutely hate sounds, especially when you don't give us warning and you tell us, oh, we've noticed that there might be some terrorist activity on both sides, and so they just start firing. And I'm like, do I put my head down because something could come from the ground, or do I cover my ears? There's no way you're blocking out the sound coming from a gun carrier when the gun carrier is in front of you. So another thing about me, I don't like loud sounds. The final thing about me is my father is a bishop. And so I grew up listening to stories. And if you've worked anywhere in Africa, you know that storytelling is at the heart of our communities. We pass on tradition, culture, religion, good and bad behavior through stories. And I hope that as I tell a couple of stories today, we arrive at some things that Susie already touched on, which is thinking about the AI that we use before we use it, before we spend on it, before we deploy it. Shall we begin? AI and us in 2026. The first thing is decisions, daily services. So we want to buy a ticket. We're checking where the cheapest places to buy the ticket. Getting here today, I'm one of those people who hold up Google Maps and I'm like, okay, it says go that way, because I'm absolutely horrible with directions. And if you tell me go east or go north, might as well shoot me because I'm not going to get it right. So traffic support, I had options of 3 routes here, and I took the one that said I could walk because I had a baby, trying to lose weight, all of those types of things. Personalized shopping assistance, health and fitness guidance, all of those types of things. Knowledge and information processing. For a lot of us, we use AI to extract data. We're dealing with inordinate amounts of data from the communities that we're serving, and sometimes we need a bit of help to pull out information from very large data sets. We're summarizing research, communication and language, everywhere you go. So I speak a bit of French, my husband does not, and we went to France the month before I had our child, and he wanted something, and we got there, and I was on my phone, and next thing someone's tapping me, and I turn, and he's like, no, she's the French person. And I'm like, who? You're trying to order something I haven't studied on Duolingo yet. How am I supposed to help you? And so we have chatbots for service information, content creation for campaigns. I'm currently part of a campaign that's ongoing in Nigeria now, which is called Real Odogwu No Dey Hide Face, and it's by the National Cybercrime Agency UK in coordination with some agencies in Nigeria, including the police. Real Odogwu No Dey Hide Face simply means real people or real wealth doesn't need to hide, and speaks to fraud and scams that are originating in Nigeria and targeting countries outside the country. And of course, there's language translation. There's creation and innovation, generating images, etc. There's sprucing up social media content. So how sexy is your Instagram today? What AI are you using? Are you using edits? Are you using InShot? What are you using to make your feed look better? And then, of course, there's prototyping tools and systems, decision support and forecasting. How do we predict the future? I feel like next time, can I go first? Because Susie said a lot of what I wanted to say. Early warning systems. How do we predict the future based on what's happened in the past? If I fell down here because there's a hole there, what's the probability that you're going to fall there because the hole is still there? How do we tell what's coming because of what's already come? To us, how are you using AI in your daily life? Not work. How are you using AI in your daily life? Number one. Number two, how are you refusing to use AI? So you could answer either of the two, and we'll take a couple minutes for that. How are you using AI? How are you refusing to use AI? And maybe I'll throw in a bonus third one. If you could change anything about a particular AI system, what would you change? So any of the three. How are you currently using AI? I've given a few examples, but how are you currently using AI, and how are you refusing to use it? Anyone?
I used it to find a hotel last night because I just couldn't. I was getting so many things out of budget, and ChatGPT did it.
Speaking to budgets, okay, yes.
I'm renovating a house, so you take photos and make a contact. That's quite handy.
Yeah, okay, that's great. I think at some point, Amazon, well, I think it was Google, where you could Google something and it could show you like a live version of it. And I used to create lions and tigers and show my niece and nephew in Nigeria and scare them because I'm that auntie. Yes.
I moved to the UK somewhat recently, and I do not understand the text system here. And I feel like HMRC's website's really confusing.
Sis.
GPT could explain to me what all you're going to need to do about my text system.
Okay, a couple more. Anyone else? Yes.
I've asked my family not to upload any photos of my daughter onto AI systems.
That's really, really important. And I'm going to just say that as someone who works as an activist, advocate, active citizen, whatever you want to call it, in Nigeria, I remember that I think it was about 10 or 11 years ago, I'd done some campaign against the government, of course, and I got an email from someone saying that if I didn't take care, I wouldn't see my nephew's next birthday. And they mentioned my nephew's name. And it was the day I took my nephew off social media, took my niece off social media. My daughter is online now, but you'll only see the back of her head. It's my personal principle. And of course, I've had to tell my mother because God bless her, she wants to show my daughter to her enemies. And the truth is you have to get grandparents involved as well, because you have your entire AI policy, but your mother has a thing that she wants to do. So completely agree with you on that. Yes.
I've got a refusing one. I find it amazing that people use AI for financial advice. I'm sure it's a good idea, but for me, I'm like, what would I be not comfortable telling them all of that?
Anyone else? Yes.
I think there's a growing trend for people using AI for to craft personal messages back to relationship building. I think it's awful. But
I mean, there are people having actual relationships with AI, so crafting messages is a small thing. Let's take a couple more. Yes.
Just kind of refusing. I've been learning how to, attempting to learn how to speak Greek, and I tried Duolingo, and I was like, I just refuse to accept this is the best way to do it. So I used Lovable to build a little website, and I find that so much more helpful.
Have you built one for French? I'd like to share that with you. Okay, anyone else? If you could change something, we haven't answered that one yet. If you could change something, what would that be? Yes. Go on.
I would quite like AI to be able to say that it doesn't know the answer to something. Sometimes, for example, sometimes I'll use it if I have certain data but not a clear source. I'll try to kind of reverse engineer sourcing, but sometimes it just like makes up happenings.
Yeah.
Like videos and stuff. It'd be so helpful if it just said, I don't know.
I wish it wouldn't lie, you know? Just say I don't, yeah, completely agree, yes.
I just wish more of the companies seem to be taking the safety aspect more seriously. It just seems like an arms race. In
Who's faster?
the biggest ones, and yeah, lots of unintended consequences seem to be part of it.
Indeed, yes. Take two more? Yes.
I wish that there was a trustworthy option to keep it as a closed system, so it wasn't taking any of the things that you're putting in to learn in other ways.
I think you'd mentioned something about Copilot and how it's a closed system. In quote.
Yeah, with lots of caveats.
Exactly, because one of the things is what if they get acquired by someone else, and then the contract terms, and that's actually happened sometime in Nigeria where some people were using an AI to collate health information for a bunch of people. Nigeria has 200 million people, so when I say bunch, it's a large bunch. But to collate health information, and then the AI got sold, and the new owners had a clause that allowed them to give that information to insurers. And so this charity is like, actually, you can't do that. And they're like, well, and it took a chunk of money, it took a lot of time, a lot of back and forth to be able to extricate the data. So when I start talking about power, we're going to talk about what are the systems in place when we use the so-called cheap AI and what happens when they get sold. And the truth is everyone's trying to exit. So I build a platform, I'm building it because I want to exit. I'm waiting for Meta to buy it, or I'm waiting for Elon Musk to show interest, or any of those other people. Should we take one more? What would you, okay. Okay, you and then you.
It changed to have a green AI means we'll be wonderful.
Green, the concept of green. Sometimes I think it's a hoax, you know, because we just slap green on something because we want it to be a little more acceptable, a little less dangerous sounding than it typically is. But yes, green.
I guess related to the trust point, the way that the LLMs and how like they're clearly being programmed to like have more and more character, and like so affirming and like you're the best, or this is like and you yourself being manipulated by this robot. It's like just answer the question, like stop.
Yeah.
See what you're doing, and it's working.
Can I tell you guys something silly? So I chat with ChatGPT a lot. And one day I don't remember what it was I was talking about or what I was trying to get information about. And then I put in a sentence and it was like, you are so amazing. And so I called my husband and I'm like, look at your mate. You know, look at your mate. And see what your mate is telling me. But yeah, how I refuse to use AI is personal information as much as possible, because there is such a risk or such an ease that you slip into with using AI systems that you just want to, you know what, why don't you just tell me this? And why don't you just tell me that? Can you help me? I'm Nigerian, I do a lot of visa applications, but can you help me, you know, write this visa application letter? Can you help me do this and do that? And before you know it, it's almost as if, and so we train people on how to avoid tech-facilitated gender-based violence. And one of the ways is hackers just piece together information that you've put out. They're not necessarily magicians, right? And in the same way, I feel like as we continue to feed these LLMs, as we continue to feed these systems, at the end of the day, your AI is able to just piece together, this is who you are, this is how many children you have, these are your likes, these are this is that. And sometimes it's even super, super personal information. For instance, your periods. For instance, you know, your fertility journeys, for instance, your sicknesses and all of those types of things. And so that's my personal, you know, refuse to use AI in that type of way. So we're going to be talking about people, power, and products. And something else that she said, I'm going to stop referring to you, I promise. But something else that she said was, there was a slide she had that talked about keeping people at the center. In design, it's called, you know, user-centered design, or it's called people-centered design, etc. But truly, people are at the heart of it. The reason why we go to work every day is because we're trying to make a difference in the lives of people in less than pleasant circumstances, and this is putting it really mildly. And we're also going to talk about power and some thoughts I have around power and how power is very political. And, you know, there's the anthropic example, there's also the ICE example and how buying a doorbell could potentially put your neighbors at risk in the US because of the contracts behind Ring. And then we're going to talk about products and the things that we're putting out and how, whether we like it or not, AI is fed by us. And there's a sweet example about products and people and power rolled in one, which is LLMs being trained by people in Kenya. And most of us in Africa were colonized by the British, so we tend to speak English really well. And so LLMs are trained on us and the way we speak English, and all of a sudden, a Nigerian speaks English and we're told, oh, you're using AI. No, this is how I speak. Kenyans write and they say, oh, this has to have been AI, and we're getting disqualified from opportunities because systems have been trained on us and those same systems are now being used to exclude us. So people, power, and products. Who is this system built for? I'm going to assume that I work in one of these organizations, and just for a bit of correlation, I used to be on the board of Oxfam International. Very interesting time. I'm now on the board of Plan International Nigeria, so not the global board as it was with Oxfam. I have produced TV content for ActionAid. We produced a slate of dramas. This is a couple years ago. I'm trying to think of who else is in the DEC group. CARE currently funds some of our work in Nigeria through some sort of partnership that's going to have us creating AI learning systems, AI learning systems for women in markets. We also want to create digital watering holes so that when women go to buy lunch in the market or they want to have a chat or anything, they have a spot that we have created for them to charge their phones to confirm if credit alerts they have received as they sell things are real or not. And generally to just have that community that my organization is known for women to exist safely in a space. They can ask questions, they can have a bit of a laugh, whatever it is. So yeah, who is this system built for? Have we accurately reflected marginalized people in our training data? And a lot of times we look at people as one. But the truth is, and I'm going to use Nigeria a lot for this example because this is the country I know best, there's so many different types of people in Nigeria. And a lot of times our training data doesn't recognize that. We just see refugee. We just see internally displaced person. We just see woman. We just see uneducated woman. But there's so many intersectionalities that our training data doesn't account for. That means we do not deliver the services that we should be delivering. For instance, if I were a 14-year-old with a child, there are laws in Nigeria that kind of define a person by their marital status rather than their age. So in some instances, building your training data on is she married or not might miss out on the fact that this is a minor. Do frontline workers understand and trust our tools? We're currently doing a piece of work in the southern part of Nigeria, so in Delta State, which is where the oil is, if you know Nigeria, and Anambra State. And one of the things that we did before we started doing that work was to gather enumerators because we want to understand the problem we're solving. And we gave them the tools that they're going to be using to collect data. And one person said, I don't want to use a phone. This thing is too much. Give me paper and pen. And my colleagues were like, but we're a tech organization. We're a feminist tech organization. How dare you want to use paper and pen? And I remember saying to my head of programs, I'm like, Oga, if this person wants paper and pen, give them paper and pen. Because if they go to the market and they're fumbling and they enter the wrong data, it poisons our data. Unintentionally, but mal data sometimes is unintentional. If they don't know how to use the tool we're giving them to use, if we can't invest, and we didn't have a lot of time to do this baseline, if we don't have the time or the budget to invest in training this person to become one with this tool, there's no point. Give them the pen and paper, print this thing out, let them go there and tick it. And that's worked. Our chatbot, we have a tool in Nigeria called Kuram. It means keep me safe. Our chatbot receives incidents of tech-facilitated gender-based violence, and we have a pool of 150 lawyers who then respond. The cases are assigned to the lawyers as they come in on the website. And we found out one time that someone was reporting a case and then asked our chatbot, "Are you AI?" And the dumb thing said yes. And so the lady logged out. But she hadn't given us her phone number or her email address. And so we weren't able to reach her. But she'd started ranting in the chat. And it broke my heart because I'm like, this is such a serious issue, but we can't find this person because my chatbot for once couldn't lie and say, no, I'm Chioma or something. And so it made us go back and think, how do we change the order in which people report so that we get information from them? And if, because TFGBV is very painful and leaves people feeling really vulnerable, if we need to reach out to this person because they drop off, we can. So how do we trust our tools and understand our tools, but also change our tools around when we need to because of what we're seeing in the field? How do we stay humble and open to learning so much to say, you know what, this isn't working, or this hasn't worked as we hoped? Who designs, this is the one I like, power, politics, all of those sweet things. Who designs and governs AI systems? Right now in the world, there's like 4 people. Right? 4 people who are, kind of besties with the orange guy, who kind of have a say in everything that we are playing around. I remember someone saying that his inauguration was kind of like the crowning of who's in charge of our data, who's in charge of the ways in which we speak, who's in charge of the ways in which we live our lives, who's in charge of the ways in which we fight each other, as we can now see is happening in the Middle East. Do beneficiaries retain rights to their data? Do they even know that their data is being collected? I remember growing up on adverts that said every second a person dies in Africa. And I used to look around like, well, drop dead then. Right? Do the beneficiaries know that their data is being collected? Do they know what this data is that's being collected? Do they know how it's going to be used? Have we collected data to give them rice, but then someone comes and says, oh, I can also show them beans? And we're like, yeah, go ahead, it's the same food. Do they know that the purpose has changed? Where is this data stored? Is it stored in foreign countries without the policies and regulation that support the work that we do? So for instance, are we collecting data from Nigeria and storing it in Ukraine or Cyprus or Greece or somewhere else where it's cheaper to store the data? What regulations that apply to us here apply to the places where we're storing this data? I talked about this earlier, but if the AI company folds or changes their pricing model, are we suddenly priced out of the market? Something funny happened on LinkedIn last year, or I think 2 years ago. There was a group, I don't remember what they're called, but you could put in your LinkedIn username, etc., and they would tell you your voice. I think they're called co-author or something. I don't remember what, co-author? Yeah, and it was kind of like, the Spotify roundup for your LinkedIn. You were a leader, thoughtful, resourceful. People should listen to you. Everything it said about everyone was good. And so I'm like, this is a lie. I mean, I saw some of the people put up some of their renditions, and I'm like, you are a terrible person. There's no way. There's no way this thing is accurate. And so I didn't use it, right? So the first year was free, and LinkedIn was flooded. My roundup for the year, my roundup for the year. People were, preening. And then last year, it was paid. It suddenly had a price tag. I think it's like 99p right now, I think $1 or something like that. And I'm like, I should create something that praises people 1 year for free, and next year tell them, you know what, for a bit more, I could praise you again. So if the pricing model changes, what happens to the data? If the company is sold, if they exit, what happens to the data? What happens to the people, which is most important? Can you export that data? Can you export your model? Do you have to give up anything? What are you giving up? And finally, products. What are we actually releasing? The UN, God forgive me, is known for pilot testing, most of which well, not most, let me be fair, some of which, what's a good way to say unhelpful? Just say it to yourself. But what are we releasing? Are we piloting? Again, we come back to people, and we can't have this conversation without people. Are we piloting with people in mind? Are we trying to solve problems that we have been told exist? Or we're trying to solve problems because we think that's what's best for the people? A lot of times in Nigeria, you see, and there's I don't remember what they're called, but there's a coalition of disaster management folk that work in the Northeast, which is where we have, the largest swath of internally displaced people. And I've had the privilege to sit in on a meeting and listen to the conversations being had. And because I was there kind of like a fly on the wall, I remember leaving and saying to a friend of mine who's actually a colleague at one of the organizations, I'm like, with all due respect, these people don't get it, especially when it concerns the women they're trying to support. Because the belief is, if we give women money to trade, if we give them something to do to make money, then they're sorted. But I can't be sorted if I'm thinking about my home that's been demolished by someone that I know. Because whether we like it or not, especially in places like Nigeria, a lot of the terrorists, we know who they are. Communities know who they are. It's a really tough thing to tell somebody that, yes, I know your home's been destroyed and I know this has happened and that has happened, but here's a bunch of money, start a trade, sell to other people inside this IDP camp. And all of you have the exact same. Let me bring this home a bit. We're all in an IDP camp, right? We all have been given £10. And we are really grateful for the £10 because it's more than what we had before. And then we've been told, well, you start a trade, you start a trade, you start a trade. But we all have £10. How much spending power is in the room for anyone's trade or anyone's business to move forward? But we give them this £10 and we believe we have sorted out we've sorted out the economic situation, or we've advanced their livelihoods. And then you read reports saying we have targeted and supported how many thousand or how many million people. But if everyone in here has £10 and we all have markets and we all have businesses and we all have things we're trying to sell, how much progress are we really going to make? Are we testing things that shouldn't see the light of day? In 2026, in 2024, one of my best friends, her mother watched something on Facebook that talked about a miracle leaf and how it could cure high blood pressure, hypertension, and diabetes. Her mother is 74. And so her mother and her friends all looked for this miracle leaf, and they bought it, and they chewed it. By the time my friend finished spending money to rescue her mother's perforated intestines, she was, I think, £3,000 or £4,000 deep in medical expenses. Because there are now AI systems that people can manipulate, clone the voices of others. And I think, Susie was talking about voices that we trust. But those voices that we trust are no longer the voices that we trust, because anyone can take my voice and create something and put it out as my voice. Coming back to that same question, are we testing things that shouldn't see the light of day? Are we trialing products that open pathways for abuse for even the communities that we serve? There's been a lot of talk about the environmental impact of AI. Are we using AI in such a way that we're creating even more humanitarian crisis? Because if we use it to a point where a place starts to suffer desertification, well, we just have one more place to go to do our work. A few things to consider as I round up. Shadow AI. Again, Susie. Shadow AI versus community utility. A lot of us are using AI in isolation, and it's being touted as a bad thing. And we some of us feel kind of self-righteous to say, oh, I produced this without AI. But the truth is, a lot of people are using AI, but we're using it in silos. And so we are unable to come up with actual policies and governance principles for the ways we use it as a community. So as we go away today, just a few things to think about. How are we designing systems that support our use of AI as a community? Because there is strength in community, there is learning in community, there's correction in community, there is debate in community, as opposed to people using it independently and then telling the AI, humanize it, let it not sound like AI. There's sovereignty versus cost savings. A number of people mentioned budget, and I think it also came up as to why people are, starting to rely on AI. Lots of people are losing their jobs. I remember, I think it was, by the way, I have a personal grouse with Jack Dorsey for selling Twitter in the first place. But didn't he just lay off like 4,000 people via a tweet? And they're going to be replaced by AI. So are we saving cost? What is the cost of saving cost versus our sovereignty? What is the cost of giving up information, uploading these large swaths of information to AI systems versus the power we then have over that system? The third one is adoption. What are we adopting? So to be fair, there's been quite a few really, really exciting uses of AI in Nigeria. For instance, with predicting floods and getting money to people just before the floods hit, so they're able to gather, their property, they're able to move, they're able to do all of those types of things. There's also giving directly, which is one of my personal favorites, that allows, a lot of prediction. There's prediction around health systems. Nigeria has done, interestingly, really fantastic work with predicting epidemics and predicting where the epidemics will hit in different parts of the country. The problem is what the government then does with that information, but we're not talking about the government today. But adoption versus mal data, how are we able to, and whether we like it or not, the systems that, and I spoke to a group of journalists yesterday about online harms, and one of the things I said to them was, the systems that deny us justice offline will deny us justice online. Because online, offline, same thing, right? So osmosis, same thing. It's not even a semi-permeable membrane. It's literally the same thing. In the same way, if you are a prejudiced person offline, your data will be prejudiced because it is you feeding that data. If you are a biased person offline, if you have things like, there are certain tropes like, the angry black woman or the submissive woman or this or that or that. If you have to feed anything into AI systems or LLMs, you will feed your prejudices in. So what are the systems that we are setting up to check biases in the same way we try to check biases in real life? How are we accounting for the us in us that feeds these systems the same things that disadvantage certain people in certain places? Progress versus principles. The end justifies the means. Actually, it doesn't. Because if it creates more problems along the way, then what's the point in the first place? What are the principles that our organizations are governed by? I'll give a quick example. We were going to in building out Quorum, we're talking to a certain developer who suddenly took umbrage because he saw our report on TFGBV, and it had a fist up, but the fist was painted in, in LGBTQI plus colors. And he wrote us a very strongly worded email and said it was against his principles to do work for those types of people. And so I wrote back and I said, what types of people? And he said, the colored people in the report. And I'm like, oh, we're all black in Nigeria. What do you mean by the colored people? And then he said, those, and we ended up, I knew that's what he was talking about. But it made us go back to think, we need to have a more strengthened vendor policy and a set of principles that we give to people even before they decide to work with us. So that if working with colored people is going to be a problem, then maybe don't pitch for work with us. If working with persons with disabilities is going to be a problem, maybe don't pitch for work with us. In the same way, what are our, there's a way they say it in relationships. What's your, come on, we're in relationships. What's the thing that you... No, there you go. Someone in a relationship, non-negotiable. What's your non-negotiable principle? What is the thing that Absolutely not. This is not going to happen with this system, with the way this is deployed, with the way the training data is gathered, with the way we put out the information. And then, of course, speed versus new harms. Someone said something about there's like some sort of race, and people are churning out and churning out and churning out. And it's kind of like, you know, in fintech in Nigeria, they say things like move fast, break things, all of that nonsense, really, because people are getting broken. There's no reason why we have glasses that record people without people knowing that they're being recorded. There's no reason why we don't have protections for the people who have to interpret that data. And so they are open to all sorts of harms in the name of training LLMs. And of course, they are paid a fraction of what people in the West are being paid to do the same work. But we're trying to be fast, aren't we? There's no reason why for a lot of things. But yes, speed versus new harms. How are we, in the training thing I did yesterday, I said to them that we've already had harms existing. So we have, you know, physical violence, we have economic violence, we have all of those types of pieces of violence. And then we have artificial intelligence, which is the fuel that you point to it to just make it explode. There's no reason why in trying to produce and deliver systems that support the succor that a bunch of people are going to get because they're in a really tough place, that we create new harms for them. We have, and let's go back to Bama and Maiduguri and Borno State that I visited in 2016. In one of the IDP camps that we went to, I remember I had an apple. I brought this apple from Abuja. We'd flown from Abuja. And I was walking around in my bag, but one of my bags was transparent, so there was an apple. But I didn't know the apple was visible till I noticed a bunch of children following me. You know the way ants follow sugar. So I'm like, oh, they must really like me. I must be a wonderful person. These children are following me. And then one of my colleagues said, they can see your food. So I'm like, well, okay, well, I'm sure they still like me. But so I brought the apple out. And we didn't have a knife. So I remember it was a pen I used to kind of like just break it through so I could share it. And when I finished breaking it and giving to the children, we had the core of the apple left. And I was going to put it back into my bag. And one of the children said, give me, in Hausa, which is the language. My colleague was saying he wants you to give it to him. And I'm like, it's the core. There's nothing on, because we had shaved this apple through and through, right? To be able to satisfy all the children. They were literally getting like, you know, chocolate-sized pieces, bite-sized pieces. And he said, he wants you to give it to him. And I said, he's not going to be able to do anything with it. And my colleague said something to me that's kind of carried through in the way we design programs. He said, let him be the judge of that. And I'm like, okay. So I gave the child the thing, and he ran off, and I saw him trying to plant it. Of course, apples are not going to grow there, but I'm going to end by saying, it's 2026. We have moved beyond asking what AI is to figuring out how immersed our lives are with this AI. As we engage with people, small, big, black, white, educated, uneducated, conflict scenarios, non-conflict scenarios. Ultimately, let's keep people at the center and allow them to be the judge of exactly how we interact with them. Thank you.
Your inspiring speech. You speak about protection data and not sharing your personal data. At the same time, when you have Alexa on in your kitchen, sometimes even in the bedroom, when you have your phone where you have all your life and one password for all your applications, when you're moving with the GPS and you are tracked everywhere, I mean, is it realistic thinking that because I will not share picture of my son or my name, that's, nobody will know who I am.
It's a great question. And I'll respond with a story. I used to work for the BBC Media Action. I have done a lot of things in my life. But I used to work for the BBC Media Action. I was producing radio drama. And we had a boss that a lot of us didn't like. You know that type of boss? We didn't like this guy. And so one day, my colleague and I were late because life happens. Sometimes you're late. And our immediate line manager, who had to answer to this person we didn't like, said to us that, you know this guy doesn't like you people. It's a fact. Everybody knows this guy doesn't like you guys. Besides, and he doesn't like anyone. Why are you coming late? It is as if you know that somebody wants to roast you, right? But you take off your clothes, you oil yourself, you sprinkle some sauce, some spices, then you stand by the fire and you're like, don't roast me, don't roast me. In the same way, we know that the existing state of play is that our lives are intertwined with technology. I got here on my phone, so technically, my phone knows where I am. I wear a watch that tells my partner when I'm in Nigeria exactly where I am to 5 meters in case I get into trouble, which typically happens. Our lives are, I'm a new mom, first-time mother. I find a lot of information about my baby or about things that I should do for her online. Our lives are intertwined, but we do have the choice of what not to put on. For instance, my child's face. For instance, there's quite a bit of, there's something in the water that is making people forget their diaries and their closed friends groups, and they're bringing up really personal stuff and putting that online. There was the first wave of that in about 2009, 2010, especially on Nigerian Twitter, with dire consequences for people who felt really free by the time the 2015 and 2019 elections rolled around. The point that I'm making is, ultimately, we still have a choice. Privacy died maybe 20 years ago. But there are still things that we can keep offline. And which is why I talked about community utility, using the example of my mother, for instance. Because if I say I want to keep my child's face offline, but my mother wants to show her latest granddaughter to all her friends, that's not going to happen. That principle, that protection is not going to happen. I want my child to be able to make the decision for herself, which means that when she's in settings with other people's children, I'm not going to take pictures of them and blur out the face of my child. So there's certain decisions that we make. I don't use Alexa, for instance, much less in the bedroom, but I don't use Alexa at all. There's certain things we don't do, there's certain things we don't have because, we can't exactly say no to technology in 2026, but we can determine to some extent the depth of ourselves that we're giving up to it. Okay.
You were mentioning about sovereignty versus cost savings, but knowing the amount of budget which is flowing into the AI companies, what do you reckon charity sector, which with the other financial situation we know, can do to try to influence that? Is it a lost battle, or what could you do?
I don't know that it's as much influencing as it is finding some alternatives. And again, another story. In 2020, I started a movement called the State of Emergency GBV movement in Nigeria, which brought together 11 organizations to call for a state of emergency on GBV. As most of us know, GBV spiraled during the COVID lockdown because people were locked in with their abusers, right? And so we said, you know what, declare a state of emergency. 5 days later, President, now dead, declared a state of emergency, etc. And Global Fund for Women reached out to us and said, we want to give you guys a bunch of money. We've seen you guys online, blah, blah, blah. We want to give you guys a bunch of money. We said we were going to create comic books that discussed what violence could look like, especially sexual and gender-based violence for people in IDP camps. And they gave us this money. We brought the community together. We were all in Abuja, these organizations. None of us wanted to travel or could travel because we don't know the area as we should to be able to operate in that space. So what we did was we brought the organizations to us. It was an opportunity for them to get away. It was an opportunity for them to tell their stories in really safe and welcoming settings. And they ended up creating the stories that filled the comics. But to answer your question directly, when it came to the languages we were going to put the comics in, we had said Kanuri, Fulfulde, Hausa, English, and Pidgin. And this is what we had budget for. But when we spoke to this community that we brought together to translate some of the stories that they had gotten from the field, they said to us, take English out and put Arabic. And we're like, well, how do we get to read it? And then I'm like, well, it's not for us, it's for them. We can create our version, our English version, and keep it as a digital copy, but what's going to be printed is going to be these versions. And the reason they gave for Arabic was it's the language of Islam. And we're going to the Northeast, which is crawling with Muslims. And this is the language of instruction. And so we ended up taking out English and producing in Arabic instead. of the 5 translations that we printed, the Arabic one finished 2 times. For instance, we still have the other versions till today. But the Arabic ones, we had to reprint more than once because those were the ones moving around. And so my response is, what is the network on the ground that you can tap into? And this is something I've said in the last week to an organization who are facing some backlash in the UK because of their stance on migration. But they've poured a lot of money into migrant communities, into youth, especially disadvantaged youth, into arts, into creatives. If you might know the organization, please don't say it. But something I said in putting together a paper I submitted to them was, what are your beneficiaries saying? You seem to be fighting alone, but you have an entire community, 2024, 291 grantees. What are those grantees saying? How are we leveraging our networks on the ground? And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, we are all going to come back to human connection. Because I know quite a few people who are tired of technology in its entirety and just want to meet someone and give them a hug and have a conversation, etc. And we are going to have to find ways as organizations to ensure that we keep that hand stretched out to our people. That's the way we win. It's not trying to influence AI. They have their entire agenda. But it's the alternative. It's the people that we serve. It's the people that we talk with. It's the people that we want to do good for. I hope that helps.